Welcome back, young scholars. In this video, we will be discussing the second major trans-regional trade network, which is the Indian Ocean sea lanes. The big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, what types of goods were exchanged in the Indian Ocean trade? Second, how did geography impact Indian Ocean trade? Third, how did new technologies impact Indian Ocean trade? And then fourth, how did cultural traditions spread through Indian Ocean trade? So what types of goods were exchanged in the Indian Ocean trade, and are those similar to or different than the Silk Road? So first, let's get an idea of the geography of the Indian Ocean sea lanes. The Indian Ocean sea lanes are a maritime network that spanned from China and East Asia, included Southeast Asia, the islands of Borneo and Sumatra, India, Persia, Arabia, and stretched all the way over to East Africa and the Swahili coast states. Generally speaking, it's easier to ship goods over water. There's less energy that's involved because you're not relying upon muscle power, animal power, but instead relying upon wind and water. And so it's easier to transport goods. The transportation costs are less, and therefore the goods tended to be larger and shipped in bulk, as compared to Silk Road trade, in which you're talking almost exclusively about smaller, lighter weight luxury items. So here we're talking about like large bundles of cotton, for example, coming from India. So that's a major difference between the Silk Road and Indian Ocean trade. So how did the geography impact the Indian Ocean trade? One of the major continuities when it comes to Indian Ocean trade was the role that the monsoon winds played. So the monsoon winds are these seasonal winds that blow west in the winter and east in the summer. And so these were predictable, and they allowed for merchants and mariners to follow predictable wind patterns, which is going to help facilitate trade because it's going to allow for mariners and merchants to know when exactly to leave if they're heading in a particular direction and when exactly they'd be able to return. And so they could plot out their routes in a predictable way. Now, these seasonal winds, though, also force traders to stay and interact, which is going to result in the spread of culture. You have, for example, Arab merchants coming down from Arabia into East Africa. They're going to stay there, and as a result, they're going to spread Arabic language. They're going to have relationships with local women, these Arab male merchants. And as a result, there's going to be a whole new ethnicity of people in East Africa that is going to be a blend of Arabic and African roots, and it's going to lead to the formation and birth of the Swahili people. So how did new technologies impact Indian Ocean trade? So between 600 and 1450, larger ships are being built with improved maritime technology, which is going to increase the scope and volume of Indian Ocean trade. So for example, they start building these dhows, these ships with lateen triangular sails, which are used initially in India, Persia, Arabia, and East Africa. Now the benefit of a triangular sail is it allows you to sail upwind. If you just have a square sail, you have to have the wind at your back, but if you have a triangular sail, you can maneuver it and allow a boat to tack upwind, and so you become less reliant upon the wind over time. And these dhow ships were small, fast ships with these triangular sails, and they're still being used in the Indian Ocean region today. Now, in addition, you also had these larger junk ships. A junk boat is a type of boat developed by the Chinese, especially during the Ming Dynasty. The Admiral Zheng He is going to use these large junk ships to travel throughout the Indian Ocean region and establish trade relationships. Two other technologies that were critical in facilitating Indian Ocean trade were the compass, maritime compass, which was first developed in China, which allowed sailors to sail out into open waters, and also the astrolabe, which was first developed by the Greeks but later improved upon by the Islamic scholars. The astrolabe is kind of like the iPhone of its day, and it served all these different functions and purposes, but one of the major purposes was to determine latitude. And latitude is also really helpful when it comes to open water navigation. So how did cultural traditions spread through Indian Ocean trade? So first we see the formation of a lot of port cities of trade where markets develop. Across the Indian Ocean region, we have cities like Calcutta and Aden, Mogadishu, Mombasa, Kilwa, and then also in China, Guangzhou. These are trading ports that turn into urban centers. So this is another major change, although it could also be defined as a continuity depending on how you look at it. These urban centers have blended culture. So they have these markets where you'd see lots of people speaking lots of different languages, practicing lots of different religions. You have diaspora communities set up in these various cities as well. The major religion that is going to spread by way of the Indian Ocean sea lanes is Islam, right? These Muslim merchants are going to dominate trade, and it's going to be the major reasons why Islam is going to spread to the east coast of Africa, right here, the Swahili coast states, and also to Indonesia, so the country with the largest Islamic population. Total number of people today that practice Islam is in this modern day state of Indonesia, which includes the islands of Borneo and Sumatra. So these wealthy trade states are going to form, like the Swahili trade states in East Africa and Srivijaya in Southeast Asia. And they're going to become wealthy because they're going to be taxing trade. So let's start by talking about the Swahili trade states in East Africa. So the Swahili trade states were this collection of independent city-states that arose on the east coast of Africa. So this was not a large empire or kingdom. Instead, these were small city-states in the same way that the ancient Greeks or the Sumerians were decentralized city-states. These African traders began trading gold, slaves, and ivory from the interior. They brought these items to the coast where Arab merchants were waiting. And to facilitate trade, many of these African merchants along the coast are going to convert to Islam, right? So there's a common cultural connection. We also have, as I mentioned before, Arab men who are coming down to the east coast of Africa and then who are forced to stay there for months waiting for the winds to change. They have relations with local African women, and the result is the birth of this language and culture known as Swahili. Now, Swahili is a language that blends Bantu, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about Africa in the next video. But Bantu is a family of African languages that spread across sub-Saharan Africa. And also it blends Arabic elements. So these Arab merchants who are speaking Arabic were bringing those and mixing with the local people. So Swahili is an excellent example of a syncretic language. So in Southeast Asia, there were also wealthy kingdoms that arose as a result of the Indian Ocean sea lane trade. One such kingdom was Srivijaya. So this is the first time that we spent any significant time in Southeast Asia, so I wanted to provide just a little bit of brief context. So Southeast Asia was heavily influenced by Indian cultural traditions. So for example, initially Hinduism spread into this region, and then later Buddhism. And so this here is a picture of a temple complex in Cambodia, modern Cambodia, known as Angkor Wat. And Angkor Wat was initially built as a Hindu temple to the god Vishnu. Later it was converted into a Buddhist temple. And so we can see that Indian influence in the same way that China was influencing their neighbors in East Asia. We had something similar going on in Southeast Asia and South Asia with India and Indian culture influencing and spreading into Southeast Asia. What role did Srivijaya play when it came to trade? They held a very important strategic geographic spot right here between Malaysia, and then there's a tiny city of Singapore, which is also a country today, located right here. And this is on the Straits of Malacca. And so there was a lot of trade between Indians and the Chinese. And if you wanted to get from India to China by boat, you had to go through the Straits of Malacca. And so anyone who controlled this region could stop merchants and impose taxes. And that's one of the reasons why Srivijaya gained a lot of wealth, is because they were located right here on the Straits of Malacca. And there was a city that developed called Malacca. And this was, again, a geographically important spot located on this strait between India and China. And so in the same way that these Swahili trade states held a geographically important spot as a conduit for trade from the interior of Africa to the coast. Something very similar here, with states gaining wealth as a result of their ability to tax traders moving from South to East Asia. So another major continuity in Indian Ocean trade is the role that India played, right? It was the center of Indian Ocean trade, and therefore it was a natural site for these emporia, these warehouses for selling goods. These large trade cities sprang up along the coast of India, and they became melting pots of merchants from various regions with these many different diasporic communities. And so India's sort of central role in this Indian Ocean trade network is one of the things that really is a continuity throughout the entire duration of the Indian Ocean sea trade. So as a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer these 4 big questions. First, what types of goods were exchanged in Indian Ocean trade? Second, how did geography impact Indian Ocean trade? Be aware of those monsoon winds. Third, how did new technologies impact Indian Ocean trade? Fourth, how did cultural traditions spread through Indian Ocean trade? Thanks for watching. Energy that's involved, because you're not relying upon muscle power, animal power, but instead relying upon wind and water. And so it's easier to transport goods. The transportation costs are less, and therefore the goods tended to be larger and shipped in bulk, as compared to Silk Road trade, in which you're talking, sea lanes are a maritime network that spanned from China and East Asia, included Southeast Asia, the islands of Borneo and Sumatra, India, Persia, Arabia, and stretched all the way over to East Africa and the Swahili coast states. Generally speaking, it's easier to ship goods over water. There's less energy in Indian Ocean trade. Third, how did new technologies impact Indian Ocean trade? And then fourth, how did cultural traditions spread through Indian Ocean trade? So what types of goods were exchanged in the Indian Ocean trade, and are those similar to or different than the Silk Road? So first, let's get an idea of the geography of the Indian Ocean sea lanes. The Indian Ocean sea Welcome back, young scholars. In this video, we will be discussing the second major trans-regional trade network, which is the Indian Ocean sea lanes. The big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, what types of goods were exchanged in the Indian Ocean trade? Second, how did geography impact